But first up, the World Health Organization. Well, breaking news is that yesterday, Donald Trump is halting the USA's funding to the World Health Organization due to its mishandling of the coronavirus pandemic. And the US is actually the world's largest donor to the WHO, giving between 400 and 500 million US dollars every year, which equates to something like 2 to 2.5 billion of their 14.14 billion that they need over the course of their current 5-year cycle. And it's worth noting that this is an organization that costs the world 14.14 billion in its current 5-year plan. Trump said that the WHO willingly took China's assurances at face value, even praising China for its so-called transparency. The WHO said COVID-19 was not communicable and said there was no need for travel bans. Now, we're going to see that that is true in the WHO's mishandling of the coronavirus issue. They said it was not communicable, no need for travel bans. They also praised China despite China's cover-ups. Trump continued. The decision to keep travel open was one of the greatest tragedies and missed opportunities from the early days. The WHO's attack on travel restrictions put political correctness above life-saving measures. Now, that's not just a throwaway line either. We're going to see that actually political correctness was the motivation. The reality is that the WHO failed to adequately obtain, vet and share information in a timely fashion. Also true. So all that's correct, and I was researching for this topic before Trump actually withdrew funding. And so when I heard those statements, it sort of connected with all of the things that I've discovered, which are, namely, firstly, that the WHO has repeatedly praised the Chinese Communist Party's handling of the outbreak. They've refused to criticize the CCP, even on legitimate grounds when given the opportunity. They've repeated CCP talking points almost word for word, leveled veiled criticisms at the US on more than one occasion, or actually not so veiled in some cases, dragged their heels unbelievably on declaring a health emergency even as the virus was spreading around the world. They parroted statistics for weeks that they must have known were inaccurate, or at least strongly suspected were inaccurate. They've consistently claimed, even a month or more after it was known otherwise, that human-to-human transmission was not happening, and also called on countries for precious weeks not to enforce travel or trade bans due to the, quote, stigma it would create. So no wonder President Trump on the 8th of April said that they got it very wrong in many ways, minimised the threat very strongly, and probably did know the truth about COVID-19 long before they admitted it. Now let's step back for a moment then and analyse the timeline just to get a sense of how bad the WHO's handling of this has been. And we start with China. News outlets, including The Guardian, report that unpublished Chinese government data, which has been cited by journalists, shows that patient zero, the first known coronavirus case, was a 55-year-old from Hubei province on November the 17th, 2019. Now, if that is Chinese government data, you can be sure it's the most complimentary to China. So we can say at least November the 17th, right? Now, others have different ideas. A lot of people are saying December the 1st, but if this is true, you've got at least well back in 2019 that the first cases were emerging. But within the month, there were actually 60 confirmed cases. By the end of 2019, there were 266, and there was well over 300 on the 1st of January 2020. And that, of course, is when China notified the WHO. Doctors in Wuhan knew about the disease quite early, but they were silenced and they were disciplined for mentioning it. Dr. Ai Fen, for example, director of emergency at the Wuhan Central Hospital, diagnosed a patient with a novel coronavirus on December the 16th, 2019. She shared the test results with colleagues and sought to raise the alarm, but she was reprimanded by the hospital's disciplinary committee for doing so. Dr. Li Wenlang was sanctioned by authorities. I've mentioned Li Wenlang a couple of episodes ago as well. He was sanctioned by authorities and forced to sign a recantation after he alerted colleagues to the new disease in late December. Chinese authorities sanctioned a total of 8, what it called rumour mongers at the time, for trying to raise the alarm and talking about this virus. And sadly, Dr. Wenlang died of the disease, aged 33. In February, and sadly Dr. Fen went public claiming the medical profession was stopped from warning the world, and here's the sad part, she has since disappeared without a trace. Her whereabouts remains unknown. China continues to manipulate statistics and suppress information. It's now certain that the numbers they've published are simply not true. Yet the WHO has continually fawned over China, frankly, day in and day out. For example, in late January, the Director General said, "We appreciate the seriousness with which China is taking this outbreak, especially the commitment from top leadership and the transparency that they've demonstrated. The WHO will keep working side by side with China and all other countries to protect health and keep people safe." You know, yeah, so transparent that Dr. Ai Fen is still missing, right? So transparent that they've lied about numbers. So transparent. It's just ridiculous. Trump singled out two further problems from the WHO: its failure to recommend travel bans and its failure to report human-to-human transmission of the virus. On the latter point, human-to-human transmission, that was known to be occurring in mid-December. That's been confirmed by an international mission of scientists who went to Wuhan in late February. And in addition, officials from Taiwan's Center for Disease Control informed the WHO that it had proof of human-to-human transmission on December the 31st. But of course, the Taiwanese tip-off was ignored and China's version of events was embraced. The WHO publicly denied human-to-human transmission on January the 5th, January the 12th, and January the 14th. It took until the 22nd of January for them to confess that, in fact, it had been happening, and that was conveniently 2 days after China had made the same admission. Probably not a coincidence. But there's also issues of caseload. China reported 44 cases on the 1st of January, despite there being 381 confirmed cases that day. The WHO continued to speak in terms of these 44 confirmed cases for many days into January, hiding the true scale of the issue. Then there's travel restrictions, one of these ones that Trump really got cranky about, and you'll see why. The WHO advised against travel or trade restrictions on January the 5th, January the 11th, January the 12th, January the 23rd, February the 5th, and February the 29th. Meanwhile, the virus had spread around the world. The February 5th announcement was a rebuke to the US government, who imposed travel restrictions to China despite WHO advice. The WHO Director General at the time said, "We reiterate our call to all countries not to impose restrictions that can unnecessarily interfere with international travel and trade. Such restrictions can have the effect of increasing fear and stigma with little public health benefit." It's interesting. You will always see that excuse of stigma. Fear being used. It's a classic sort of a bureaucratic leftist kind of playbook line. You look, for example, you can't talk, for example, about things like gender issues because of stigma. You can't, you can even look at some of the worst and most horrific human rights abuses of the last little while. You look in the UK, where they had this terrible problem with these Islamic grooming gangs, which were responsible for the raping and abuse of young women in huge numbers over a long period of time, and police literally turned a blind eye. Why? Stigma. Because as soon as you say this is happening, and as soon as you mention that a lot of these people are Islamic, boom, stigma, and so they don't tell the truth. It's even the case, it's the case on all, you hear this all the time, but see, the thing is, this means that the truth is not told, and therefore people suffer and people die. And you see that here. The WHO did not declare a public health emergency of international concern until January the 30th, which is crazy if you think about it. The emergency committee of the WHO had been locked in a stalemate for 10 days, unable to decide what to do. News media investigations, unable to decide what to do for 10 days at this late stage. News media investigations have revealed that, in fact, it was the Chinese delegation on that committee that blocked the resolution, and the WHO has refused to comment when asked to clarify if that is correct. The Director General of the WHO is Dr. Tedros I practiced this and everything. Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, there we go, the former health minister and foreign affairs minister from the Ethiopian government. And in response to criticism, he's continually attacked stigma, calling it more dangerous than the virus itself and the most dangerous enemy. There it is again, stigma. Don't tell the truth, because the truth has all these nasty things in it that we think are stigma. And so you get the consequences of that. On the 19th of March, under pressure for having finally only declared a pandemic a week earlier, he said that there is no blame in this pandemic, which is convenient, isn't it? When you've just royally mucked up the whole thing, and it's 3 months into a disaster, and you're there to look after people, and you haven't done so. Of course, it's no blame. Let's not blame people. And then he retreated to perhaps yet another one of these playbook lines. Firstly you can have the stigma thing, but there's something else. And it's the last retreat of, incompetent leaders. It's identity politics. If you're rubbish and you're called out, well, you retreat into some form of identity politics. It's because of my gender or it's because of this. And of course he said, well, actually Taiwan's been running a racist campaign against him for 3 months. Typical. And Taiwan actually was the ones that warned the WHO with the truth on December the 31st, and has generally been way ahead of the WHO at every step of the way. And WHO official Bruce Aylward literally hung up the phone on a live TV interview when he was asked about Taiwan about a month ago. Now, this Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, he's not actually a medical doctor despite the title. Here's his background. He's actually alleged to have gotten the job in response to Chinese pressure, which wouldn't be a surprise. His history is checkered. He was an executive member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, a political party with a Marxist history and ties to the former Soviet Union. The Terrorism Research and Analysis Consortium lists this party as a left-wing terrorist group with a Maoist Marxist communist ideology, and it documents 10 terrorist incidents perpetrated by the party between 1975 and 1990, including political assassinations and attacks on soft targets. Dr. Ghebreyesus has been accused of covering up cholera outbreaks in Ethiopia when he was a government minister. And just in case you're in any doubt about his ideology and what he currently thinks, as recently as 2017, get this, as 2017, he tried to appoint Robert Mugabe as a WHO Goodwill Ambassador. Robert Mugabe, yes, the dictator of Zimbabwe, whose people were in a state of oppression and famine and just horror at the time, and is not a very good man. Anyway, that's the scale. That's the measure of this guy. Moral of the story: the WHO actually is a threat to world health in many ways, and it's certainly a communist puppet. There's no doubt about it. Multinational politics, you see, when it comes to all of these things, multinational politics is a corrupt mess. It has been for a very long time, to varying degrees. And I'm very perplexed, when I meet particularly, my peers or younger people who are idealistic, intelligent, and even Christian, and they're in law or international relations or politics or economics, studying these things and so forth, and looking with starry eyes at these bodies as if they're great bastions of virtue. And that's just a level of naivety which blows my socks off. I've met people, for example, who are studying law, who want to work at the International Criminal Court. It costs $200 million US a year, employs 800 staff, and has had, however many despots and whatnot stand before it, and yet has only ever achieved in its entire lifetime 3 convictions. Or you take the United Nations, which has countries like Saudi Arabia on its Human Rights Council, and which couldn't even declare a genocide. The very thing it was set up to do. It couldn't even declare a genocide when religious minorities, including Christians, were being systematically exterminated from the Middle East by ISIS. Or the WHO, which is run by a government official from a Marxist terrorist political party, or at least it has those roots. And he lies about the very thing he's supposed to tell the truth on. A global pandemic. I mean, that's what they're there for. If you want to do good, go and volunteer at your local soup kitchen, to the groceries for your elderly neighbour, babysit your nieces and nephews. You do more good in that single act than you would in years bumbling around the bureaucratic mess that is these multinational piles of corruption. And I can't help thinking, what is it that makes these things so ineffective? Why are they such a mess when they were set up with such noble aspirations? So much good was supposed to be done. And I can't help thinking it's because they're not really addressing the issue. Well, what's the issue? Well, we've just seen it. The issue's people. It's that age-old problem of the corruption of the human heart. It's individuals that are the problem. It's the people problem. That whole thing that, what's the contradiction of men and women? It is that they're so great and yet so unbelievably flawed. And there is something that just stops us ever being able to achieve good and only good, and which is a corruption that continually dogs us. And it's easy to point the finger at the world's problems as if it's all out there. It's all the isms, the sexisms and the racisms and the others and the phobias and patriarchy and globalism. It's all these disembodied problems as if they're floating around in the ether. And it's easy to do that. But see, this is the great truth that God reveals to us, and it is that the problem isn't out there. The problem is in here. Actually, evil isn't disembodied. It's something that resides in hearts. It's corruption that walks and talks with all of us. And the reason society has a problem is society is made up of people. This is a problem that affects all people. It affects you and it affects me. And the problem starts at home. And that's, of course, the great revelation of the gospel. It transforms the human soul. It's the solution. It's the answer the world craves. It's the solution that really goes to the true nature of the world's problems. Your sin and my sin, the sin of individuals. It's a personal solution. It's a confronting solution because we have to look at ourselves and we have to realize this thing, that we're the problem. We're part of the problem. But it's the solution, thank God, that Jesus Christ actually died for, because he died for your sin and for my sin. So the WHO, I'm not saying it's completely useless. Well, I'm not saying that the idea is completely useless, although in its present iteration it's not doing very well. But really these international organisations, helpful as they can be, they ain't solving the real problem. Hey, one more thing, I've been looking at the metrics and I figured out something. You guys are watching the videos and not subscribing, so please help us out a great deal by hitting the like button and then hitting subscribe, hitting the bell as well so you get the notifications. It helps us out a really great deal, and you can click here to see more videos.